أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The topic of today's khutbah is what is a sect and is the Lahore Ahmadiyya Jama a sect? قال الله تعالى في القرآن الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإن هذه أمتكم أمة واحدة وأنا ربكم فاتقون فتقطعوا أمرهم بينهم زبرا كل حزب بما لديهم فرحون فذرهم في غمرتهم حتى حين صدق الله العظيم. قال الله تعالى في القرآن الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم من الذين فرقوا دينهم وكانوا شيعا كل حزب بما لديهم فرحون صدق الله العظيم. The first verse which I recited translates as follows. In fact, it's the first three verses which I recited. They translate as follows. And surely this your community is one community, and I am your Lord. So keep your duty to me. But they split apart their unity into sects, each faction rejoicing in what it had. So leave them in their ignorance till a time. Chapter 23, Al-Mu'minun, verses 52 to 54. And the second passage which I recited translates as follows. And you have to understand that before it says, before the verse, do not become from among those who split up their religion and become sects, each faction rejoicing in what it has. And that's chapter 30, Surah Ar-Rūm, verse 32. Now, the verse which comes before the first verse which I recited above, and surely this your community is one community and I am your Lord, that previous verse begins with the words, O ye messengers, O you messengers, addressing the messengers of Allah. So in this verse, and surely your community is one community and I am your Lord, so keep your duty to me, all prophets are addressed by God and told that they are one community with God as their Lord. And it is added then, but they split up their unity into sects, meaning that their followers after them split apart this unity and became different factions. And it goes on to say, each faction rejoicing that it was the right one. Now, of course, God could not address all messengers at the same time because they came into the world at different times and in different places. So what is meant when it says, Allah said, O you messengers? What is meant is that each messenger came with the same basic message to do the same thing, so that the messengers can be considered as belonging to one and the same community. O messengers, your community is one community. But it was through their followers that various different religions came into existence, with each religion saying that only its followers will be accepted by God as being on the right path, while everyone else will be consigned to hell. Now, the Holy Quran actually considers religion as just one, and it considers different religions themselves as being sects of that one religion. Now, in the second passage which I recited, which instructs that you should not become like those who split up their religion and become sects, it is not referring to the creation of sects within Islam. What it means is that Islam has not come to add further division among religions by adding yet another religion to the list of existing religions. Islam has in fact come to declare that the prophets of all religions had given the same basic teaching, that is to say, the teaching of the worship of one God and keeping your duty to Him. However, later on, the followers of the various prophets stopped giving precedence and priority to the primary message of their prophet, and instead they raised certain secondary matters to the level of fundamentals. So different religions were built around these secondary issues, and the followers of those religions came to regard these secondary points as more important and as the essential ones, so that you had to believe in them in order to gain acceptance from God. Otherwise, you were doomed to hell. Now, on the basis of these verses which I've read, an objection is sometimes raised against us, against the Ahmadiyya movement, by other Muslims, saying that our movement, by its very existence as a separate group among Muslims, is violating the teachings of Islam not to create sects. But as I pointed out just now, these verses are not talking about sects in Islam. They're talking about religions themselves as being sects, and each religion proclaiming about itself that only it is true. These verses teach that Islam is not such a sect among existing religions. And of course, nor should it become, at the hands of its followers, such a sect among existing religions. Unfortunately, our Muslim critics are the ones who have turned Islam itself into such a sect, which proclaims that only its followers will be admitted into heaven by Allah, while all others will be rejected. Now, as regards these critics of ours, you will hardly ever find them, you will hardly ever hear them mentioning what various religions have in common and how to develop understanding between Islam and other religions. They consider that being Muslims, they are superior to everyone else, and they are destined to be the true rulers of the whole world, and they look down upon the followers of other faiths as inferior. So on the one hand, they are telling us that they want unity within Islam by removing all sects. But on the other hand, they promote disunity and strife between Islam and other religions so as to divide humanity. Now I move on to the question of sects within Islam. Of course, the Holy Quran requires Muslims to be united among themselves. And it says to Muslims as follows: "And hold fast by the rope of Allah all together, and do not be disunited." This is chapter 3, Surah Al-Imran, verse 103. By the rope of Allah is meant the Quran. The Quran is the only one certain thing that Muslims can be united on. So this says, hold fast by the rope of Allah. And in the next verse, it adds this. And from among you, there should be a community who invite to good and enjoin the right and forbid the wrong. And these are there who are successful. Now this verse requires that among Muslims there should be a group whose functions are to invite outsiders to the message of the Quran and to teach Islam to Muslims themselves. The first function is called inviting to good, that is to say, inviting to the Quran. And the second function is enjoining the right and forbidding the wrong. That means instructing Muslims as to what is right and what is wrong. The claim of our Lahore Ahmadiyya Jama is that it is such a group and it is not a sect. Now let us again look at the verse before this one, which I just recited, verse 103 of chapter 3, Surah Al-Imran. And hold fast by the rope of Allah altogether, and do not be disunited. So what do you do when you see Muslims following some beliefs or practices or ideas that are clearly contrary to the Quran? Do you say that to try to correct them will cause disunity among Muslims, and not causing disunity is more important than holding fast by the rope of Allah? Is that what you say? Now, the greatest of Muslims who have ever lived in the history of Islam always believed that bringing Muslims to the correct path in matters where they had gone wrong was far more important than fearing that this would cause disunity among Muslims. Shortly after the death of the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, certain issues arose which divided his own companions. On some matters, they expressed and taught different points of view and different interpretations. They did not hold back from this for fear of dividing Muslims into sects. Now, if we move on just a few years later after their time, then around 50 years after the death of the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we see the famous example of Imam Hussein, grandson of the Holy Prophet. All Muslims commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Hussein in the month of Muharram, as you well know, and they lament and sorrow over the events of his murder and the murder of his small band of followers by the forces of the cruel Khalifa Yazid at the place known as Karbala. That tragedy could have been easily avoided if Imam Hussein and his 70 odd followers had accepted Yazid as the rightful Khalifa, as had been done by the vast majority of Muslims of the time. We do not find our critics accusing Imam Hussein of breaking the unity of the Muslims. And in fact, the whole of the Muslim world considers Hazrat Imam Hussein's stand against Yazid to be an act of the greatest courage and sacrifice. Quite rightly. Muslims cry and lament and express sorrow during Muharram that Imam Hussein was on the side of right and truth. We don't see our critics crying and lamenting that Imam Hussein was wrong and he should have maintained the unity of Muslims by taking the pledge of allegiance to Yazid. Now, the Lahore Ahmadiyya Jama is in fact the very opposite of a sect. The Lahore Ahmadiyya Jama has always strongly advocated that Muslims should work together on the causes that they agree on, and they should not fight on matters that they disagree on, while they can still retain their disagreements and identities. They can still do that without fighting. Now, Islam, when it deals with other religions, mainly the Jewish and Christian religions, it points out to them those basic principles and teachings given to them by their prophets, which they had neglected and not acted upon. And Islam says it came to revive those principles. In the same way, inside Islam itself, the Lahore Ahmadiyya Jamaat points out to Muslims certain basic principles of Islam given to them by their religion, but which they neglected and had drifted away from. And the aim of the Lahore Ahmadiyya Jamaat, and this was the aim of the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, is to revive those neglected principles. One such principle is that anyone who claims to be a Muslim by declaring the kalima shahada must be regarded by other Muslims as a Muslim and treated as a Muslim brother. Various sects in Islam have declared members of other sects of Islam as being non-Muslims, unbelievers, and expelled from the fold of Islam. And these are not the only ones who have been declared kafir, unbelievers. Various sects have been declaring each other in the same way. The Lahore Ahmadiyya Jamaat emphasizes that this practice, in fact this malpractice, is against Islam and that it causes disunity and discord among Muslims. So how can then our Jamaat be accused of creating a sect when it teaches that members of all sects of Islam are Muslims and cannot be called kafir or unbeliever and expelled from Islam? In fact, this Jamaat is almost the only Muslim group to put forward and emphasize this principle. The Lahore Ahmadiyya Jamaat, throughout its history, has come to the rescue and assistance of Muslims all over the world. Muslims in many places in the world, including in the Indian subcontinent itself, found themselves under attack by Christian missionaries or by the Arya Samaj Hindu militant sect. These anti-Islamic groups try to convert Muslims to their own faiths by making all kinds of allegations against Islam, against the Holy Quran, and against the Holy Prophet Muhammad. What would happen in those days is that the local Muslims of a certain area or certain place in the world would send a message to Muslim organizations in the Indian subcontinent asking for help in combating these attacks. Sometimes their message was sent directly to the Ahmadiyya Juma Islam, Lahore, or it was sent to some large, well-known Sunni Muslim body like Jamiatul Ulama Islam. But those bodies, being unable to help, would themselves forward their message to the Ahmadiyya Juma Islam Lahore to ask if they could help. And in response, our missionaries would be dispatched to such places. Or if it was not possible to send a missionary, then our literature was sent there to combat these attacks against Islam. It is no exaggeration to say that due to the Lahore Ahmadiyya movement's work, millions of Muslims were saved from either leaving Islam altogether or becoming alienated from it. In fact, in the Punjab, before partition, somewhere near Lahore, there were Muslims belonging to the ethnic group of Rajput Malkana. And they had been misled by Arya Samaj preachers and were either on the verge of leaving Islam or actually had left Islam to become Aryas. But through the work of the Lahore Ahmadiyya missionaries, they came back to Islam or they stayed within Islam, and literally hundreds of thousands, there were hundreds of thousands of them who were saved from leaving Islam, and they remained as Muslims. In addition, there was the great missionary work of the Lahore Ahmadiyya movement done in Western countries through the Walking Muslim Mission from 1913 to the 1960s, and the mission at the Berlin Mosque in Germany from 1924 till today. Now, in a khutbah, there is no scope for giving any details of the work of these missions. But apart from their propagation of Islam to non-Muslims, these missions catered to the religious and social needs of Muslims in Britain and Germany at a time when there were no Muslim organizations in these countries to help Muslims. And although the Walking Muslim Mission ceased to exist from the late 1960s, the work done by it for the general Muslim community in the UK, and in fact elsewhere as well, but I'll say in the UK, that work is commemorated at regular events even now. And one such event will be at Brookwood Cemetery near Woking tomorrow between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. So to conclude, the Lahore Ahmadiyya Jamaat worked for the cause of Islam in a broad sense. And from that work, Muslims of other sects benefited. This Jamaat did not work to defeat other Muslim sects, to fight against them, and to prove itself true over them, as various Muslim sects had been doing against each other. So it is absolutely obvious and evident that the Lahore Ahmadiyya Jamaat is not a sect. It is not a sect. And in the end, we pray that may Allah accept the great sacrifices and efforts of the Lahore Ahmadiyya Jamaat made purely for the cause of Islam and the benefit of all Muslims. Ameen. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quran al-Azim wa nafa'na wa iyyakum bil ayati wa zikril hakim. Innahu ta'ala jawadun karimun malikun barurur rahim.